The surface of our oceans is deceiving. What lies beneath it contradicts almost everything we believe we understand about life on this planet. This is the phenomenon of deep-sea gigantism. Sea spiders with legs spans longer than a large dog crawl across the ocean floor. Jellyfish trail tentacles longer than a blue whale. And even the most unassuming creatures down here have grown to sizes that seem to belong to another world entirely. And, yes, all of these deep-sea creatures are real. Down here, in the coldest and deepest oceans on Earth, in places stranger to us than any imagined alien planet, the rules of familiar biology simply stop applying. It is a phenomenon most people have never heard of, because it only occurs in the most extreme oceans on the planet. Cold, darkness, crushing pressure, conditions under which life itself seems almost impossible. So why do the creatures here not shrink, but grow instead? Shrimp stretch out as long as your forearm. Giant crabs reach leg spans longer than a person is tall. But why would nature do this? Why would evolution pour so much energy into pure size in an environment that is cold, dark, and seemingly hostile to life? Is it a cruel accident, or is it a brilliant survival strategy? To solve this mystery, we first need to take a journey downward. We leave behind the sunlit epipelagic zone, where almost all the ocean life we know lives out its days. Up here the water is warm, the fish are colourful, and the sun's energy drives photosynthesis. But once we drop below about 200 meters, we enter the mesopelagic zone, the twilight zone. The light grows weaker, colours fade into grey, and the temperature begins to fall. Deeper still, below 1,000 meters, the last trace of sunlight disappears entirely. We have entered the bathypelagic zone, the midnight zone. Here reigns eternal darkness, broken only by the ghostly glow of bioluminescence, light that living creatures generate themselves to lure prey or find a mate. It is exactly here, in this black, crushing layer of the ocean, that the transformation begins. The pressure down here is immense, hundreds of times greater than what we experience at the surface. Let us try a thought experiment. Imagine that on every square centimetre of your body rested the weight of a fully loaded delivery truck. That is roughly the situation down there. For a human being, it would mean instant death. Our lungs would collapse, every air-filled cavity in our bodies would implode. But for the creatures of the deep, this pressure is not an obstacle. It is simply a constant as ordinary to them as the air is to us. And interestingly, this extreme pressure actually seems to favour larger bodies. Smaller animals have a greater surface area relative to their volume, which means pressure can affect their cells more intensely. A larger body, with more volume relative to its surface, is more stable. Its internal structures remain intact under the crushing weight above. Let us look closely at one of the most striking examples of this phenomenon, the Japanese spider crab. While the small crabs you might find scuttling along a rocky shoreline could comfortably fit in a child's hand, this animal plays in an entirely different league. With a leg span approaching 4 meters, it is the largest living arthropod on the planet. If this creature were placed in your living room, its legs would stretch from one wall to the other. It moves slowly, almost mechanically, like a relic from a long-forgotten age, drifting across the seafloor. Its body itself is small compared to those grotesquely long limbs, but that reach gives it a crucial advantage in the darkness. But size in the deep sea is not only a matter of what an animal can do. Often it is a matter of what it must do, and that brings us to one of the most fundamental problems of life down here: hunger. The deep sea is a desert. Because no plants can grow here, the foundation of the food chain as we know it simply does not exist. Life down here depends entirely on what falls from above. Scientists have given this constant, gentle rain of organic matter an almost poetic name: marine snow. It is an endless, quiet drizzle of dead plankton, fecal pellets, and decaying tissue sinking down from the sunlit layers into the abyss. Picture it as living entirely on dust falling from the ceiling of an enormous cathedral. It is scarce, it is nutritionally poor, and the competition for it is fierce. This is where a strange biological law comes into play. To survive on so little food, an animal must become large. A bigger body is simply more efficient. This is known as Kleiber's law. A small animal, like a mouse, has a racing metabolism and must eat constantly just to avoid starving. A large animal, like an elephant, or in this case a giant isopod, burns far less energy relative to its mass. In the cold of the deep sea, where temperatures often hover just above freezing, the chemical reactions inside the body slow down even further. A deep sea giant becomes something like a perfectly insulated house. It holds onto its energy for an extraordinarily long time. When a giant isopod finally finds a meal, perhaps a dead fish that has drifted down from above, it can gorge itself so completely that it nearly loses the ability to move. But that single meal can sustain it for months, sometimes even years. In laboratory experiments, these animals have survived more than 5 years without eating at all. A smaller animal with less storage capacity and a faster metabolism would have starved long before. Down here, size is not a luxury. It is an insurance policy against permanent famine. Then there is what is known as Bergmann's rule, which states that animals in cold environments tend to grow larger than their relatives in warmer regions. Although this rule was originally proposed for warm-blooded animals like penguins or polar bears, we see similar patterns among the invertebrates of the deep. Cold water draws heat away from small bodies faster, or in this case, affects physiological processes more harshly than it does in large, compact bodies. A larger body is thermally more stable, even for an animal whose temperature matches its surroundings. But it is not only the cold and the hunger, it is also safety. In the deep sea there are no hiding places, there are no coral reefs, no crevices to dart into when danger approaches. The seafloor is often a vast, open plain of mud. If you are small, you are a snack. If you are large, you are a fortress. The giant isopod, with its hard-armoured shell, is simply too tough for most predators to crack. Its size alone is intimidating. An anglerfish thinks twice before trying to swallow something the size of a football, wrapped in armour. These creatures are not the monsters of old sailors' tales, waiting to drag ships into the abyss. They are survivors, shaped by extreme forces over millions of years. They have developed strategies as strange as their appearance. They grow slowly, they live long, and they possess a patience that we, as creatures who think in seconds and minutes, can barely comprehend. While we live our lives in a constant rush above, they sit below in the darkness and wait, waiting for the next crumb of marine snow, waiting for the next opportunity. We have looked at some of the basic drivers so far: pressure, cold, food scarcity, and efficiency. But out there in the dark are creatures of an entirely different caliber. Beings that are not merely large but truly gigantic. Beings whose eyes are so enormous they can detect the faintest glimmer of light in the blackness. When we think of the old myths of the sea, we usually picture one specific image: the kraken, a monster from the deep that wraps its enormous arms around entire ships and drags them down into the abyss as if they were toy boats in a bathtub. These stories are old, often exaggerated, and yet they are rooted in something real. Down there in the eternal darkness exist creatures that may well have inspired these legends. But the truth, as is so often the case in nature, is far more fascinating and far more complex than any sailor's tale. Let us compare two of the largest and most mysterious creatures in the world, the giant squid and the colossal squid. Many people lump these two together, or assume they are the same animal. That is a significant mistake, because the difference between them is roughly the difference between a basketball player and a sumo wrestler. Both are giants, but they are built for completely different lives in the extreme deep. The most famous of these giant cephalopods is, of course, the giant squid. It is the icon of cryptozoology, the creature that made Jules Verne's tale of the depths immortal. For a long time we knew almost nothing about it beyond what dead, washed-up specimens could tell us. It was not until 2004 that researchers managed to capture the first images of a living giant squid in its natural habitat, in the twilight zone roughly 1,000 meters down, and what we have learned is remarkable. The largest specimen ever recorded measured around 13 meters. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the length of a city bus. If you were standing at a bus stop and one of these creatures drifted past you, you would be looking at the longest living animal made of flesh and blood you are ever likely to see. But here is the twist. The giant squid, despite its length, is surprisingly light. A 13-meter specimen weighs in at around 275 kilograms. That sounds like a lot, but spread across such enormous length, this animal is more of a long, slender athlete. Most of its length comes from its two extremely long feeding tentacles, used to snatch prey from a distance. But if we leave these waters behind and travel toward Antarctica, into the southern polar seas, we encounter the true heavyweight champion of the invertebrate world, the colossal squid. Despite what its name suggests, the colossal squid is often somewhat shorter than the giant squid, usually reaching around 10 meters in length. But do not let the shorter length fool you. What it lacks in meters, it makes up for in sheer mass. While the giant squid is slender, the colossal squid is massive, almost bulky in build. It can weigh between 500 and 700 kilograms. Picture taking the weight of a small compact car and compressing it into the shape of a squid. That is the kind of mass we are talking about. It is the heaviest invertebrate on Earth. It lives at depths beyond 2,000 meters, in a world that is even more extreme, even colder, and even darker than the realm of the giant squid. Why is it so much more massive? The answer lies in a remarkable evolutionary situation. The colossal squid is a rare example of what scientists call double overlapping gigantism. That means it benefits from two different growth effects at the same time: deep sea gigantism, which makes creatures in the depths grow larger, and polar gigantism, which makes creatures in extremely cold waters grow larger as well. In a sense, it won the genetic jackpot, or depending on how you look at it, drew the most extreme survival conditions imaginable. The habitat of the colossal squid around Antarctica is a world of extremes. Water temperatures here often fall below the freezing point of fresh water, and the sea remains liquid only because of its high salt content. In this icy environment, the colossal squid has adapted radically. It belongs to a family known as glass squids, which, as the name suggests, are normally transparent, a way of hiding from predators. But at this size, and in this cold, transparency is no longer an option. Instead, it has developed a thick reddish skin. Why red? In the deep sea, red light is the first wavelength to be absorbed. A red creature down here does not appear red at all. It appears completely black. It is the perfect cloak of invisibility. This thick skin serves not only as camouflage but also as insulation. It is a perfectly sealed, drifting tank, gliding silently through the icy water. But the most frightening thing about these animals is not their size, it is their weapons. The giant squid uses suckers lined with small saw-like teeth. The colossal squid takes this one step further. Its tentacles are equipped with rotating, swiveling hooks, razor-sharp and mobile. When it seizes prey, often the massive Antarctic toothfish, these hooks dig deep into flesh and allow no escape. It would be easy, with a description like that, to picture an aggressive monster patrolling the oceans, tearing apart everything in its path. But here we need to clear up a deep misunderstanding, one rooted firmly in human psychology. We tend to equate size with aggression and dominance. In the deep sea, the opposite is true. With this enormous size comes a price, an extremely slow metabolism. The colossal squid has perfected the art of conservation. It follows a principle scientists call Kleiber's law. This law states that metabolism does not scale linearly with body size. An animal 1,000 times heavier than another does not need 1,000 times more energy. Instead, energy consumption per kilogram of body mass becomes increasingly efficient the larger an animal becomes. The colossal squid takes this principle to its absolute extreme. Studies have estimated that its energy needs are so astonishingly low that it requires only around 45 calories a day. That is less than half an apple or a single small biscuit. An adult human burns roughly 2,500 calories a day. This 700 kilogram giant needs only a tiny fraction of that. This means the colossal squid is not a wild hunter, chasing prey through the ocean in epic pursuits. It simply cannot afford to waste energy on a chase. It is an ambush predator. It hangs in the water, almost motionless, and waits. It waits for prey to wander unknowingly into its reach. A single toothfish can provide it with enough energy to last roughly 200 days. For us, that would be like sitting down for one enormous holiday feast, and then not needing to eat again until the following summer. That is the life of a colossal squid. To make this strategy of sitting and waiting in total darkness work, it has developed another remarkable feature: the largest eyes in the animal kingdom. Its eyes can reach a diameter of up to 30 centimeters. A standard football is smaller than the eye of this squid. You could almost say its eye is the size of a human head. Why would an animal need eyes that enormous in complete darkness? Not necessarily to find food, but to avoid becoming food itself. Because despite its size and its hooks, the colossal squid has a natural enemy, the sperm whale. Sperm whales are essentially the only animals that dare to attack a fully grown colossal squid. The squid's enormous eyes are specifically tuned to detect the faint glow of bioluminescence, the light produced when a large body, like a sperm whale, plows through the water and disturbs microscopic plankton. It acts as an early warning system. The squid sees the glittering trail of an approaching whale long before the whale can detect it with sound. We often find scars on the skin of sperm whales, circular marks from suckers, or long gashes from the hooks of colossal squid. For a long time we assumed these were signs of epic battles where the squid attacks the whale. Today, scientists believe these are mostly defensive wounds. The squid is not fighting for dominance, it is fighting for its life, desperately trying to escape the whale's jaws. These animals, then, are not monsters. They are masterpieces of efficiency. They have learned to survive with absolute minimalism in a world that forgives no mistakes. Their size is not a sign of abundance, it is an adaptation to scarcity. They are enormous, drifting reservoirs of energy in the darkness of the ocean. But how exactly does this extremely slowed metabolism work on a physiological level? How does an animal with so little energy operate such an enormous body without simply starving or freezing? And why does cold play such a decisive role in pushing these animals towards such extremes? This takes us deeper into the biochemical secrets of the deep, into a world where energy is the most precious resource imaginable, 45 calories a day for a 700 kilogram giant. Let that number sink in for a moment. In energy terms, it is roughly like driving a large freight truck across an entire country on a single shot glass of fuel. It defies everything we think we understand about energy consumption. When we exercise, when we work, when we simply exist, we burn through calories like a furnace. So how do these animals seem to bend the laws of thermodynamics? The answer is not magic. It is pure, brutal efficiency, a principle perfected by nature over millions of years. To understand this, we need to look again at Kleiber's law. Max Kleiber, a Swiss agricultural scientist, discovered a fascinating pattern back in the 1930s. He found that an animal's metabolism does not scale linearly with its body size. This sounds complicated, but it is actually quite simple. If you double the size of an animal, you do not double its energy requirements. A horse that weighs 1,000 times more than a mouse does not need 1,000 times more energy to stay alive. Think of it like heating an apartment building. A small, single-room apartment is relatively expensive to heat per square meter because so much warmth escapes through the outer walls. A massive apartment block, on the other hand, is far more efficient. The inner units insulate each other. The surface area through which heat escapes is much smaller relative to the total volume. Large animals are like that apartment block. The bigger they grow, the more efficiently their internal engine runs. In practical terms, being large in a food-poor environment like the deep sea is the ultimate energy-saving trick. A small organism has to eat constantly, Like someone glued to their phone, checking for the next opportunity every few minutes. Its inner fire burns fast and hot. A giant, by contrast, is the picture of calm. It is like a great ocean liner that picks up momentum once, and then glides for days without anyone needing to add more fuel. But Kleiber's law only explains part of the story. It explains why being large can be efficient, but not why it becomes necessary in the deep sea. That is where the cold comes in. We humans are warm-blooded mammals, what biologists call endotherms. That is a luxury that costs us dearly. Whether it is 30 degrees outside or well below freezing, our bodies work hard to maintain a constant internal temperature. We are like houses that run the heating year-round, with the windows left open. Every additional kilogram of body mass on a warm-blooded animal adds another burden to that heating bill. This is why polar bears grow large, but never become as absurdly gigantic as the invertebrates of the deep. Eventually, they simply cannot eat enough seals to keep their internal furnace running. The giants of the deep sea, the crabs, the isopods, the squid, are ectotherms, what we commonly call cold-blooded. They have no internal heating system. Their body temperature matches the temperature of their surroundings exactly. And in the deep sea, that means just above freezing, often somewhere between 1 and 4 degrees. In this cold, something fundamental happens to the chemistry of life. Chemical reactions slow down. This applies to a car rusting in winter just as much as it applies to digestion in a fish. In the deep sea, life literally runs in slow motion. Enzymes work more slowly, nerve impulses fire more gradually, hearts beat less often. Now combine this drastically slowed pace of life from the cold with the enormous efficiency of a huge body from Kleiber's law. The result is an organism that burns almost no energy simply to exist. It exists in a permanent state of rest. Scientists believe this efficiency is also connected to the geometry of life itself, specifically to the branching, fractal nature of blood vessels and circulatory systems. Picture a great old oak tree with a thick trunk that branches into limbs, then twigs, then tiny leaves. Our blood vessels work in a similar way. The larger the animal, the more efficient this distribution network becomes. It is as if nature designed a logistics system that runs more smoothly the bigger it gets. But every advantage has a cost. The price for this incredible energy efficiency is the loss of speed and explosiveness. A deep-sea giant is no sports car. It is a heavy freight train that barely gets moving. A colossal squid cannot chase prey through the water like a dolphin. It cannot sustain a long pursuit. Its muscles are often softer, more waterlogged, less densely packed with the cellular machinery that produces quick bursts of energy. It is a glider, not a sprinter. This changes everything about how these animals behave. Life in the deep is not a constant struggle, not a relentless cycle of hunting and being hunted the way we imagine on the open savanna. It is a long, quiet wait. It is a life of patience, a life in which an animal moves as little as possible, so as not to waste the precious energy reserves it gathered from its last meal, perhaps months ago. Think of anglerfish, or the great jellyfish of the deep. They do not actively swim out searching for prey. They hang in the water like living traps. They let the prey come to them. This strategy of ambush and patience is the direct consequence of their metabolism. Move, and you lose. Wait, and you might win. It is a world of extreme thrift. Imagine having to make a single tank of fuel last an entire year. You would not drive around for fun. You would only start the engine when absolutely necessary. You would coast down every hill in neutral. That is exactly what these animals do. They ride currents, they use their buoyancy, they use their sheer size to drift through time rather than fight against it. This extreme slowdown has another fascinating side effect: longevity. An engine that runs slowly wears out more slowly. In the deep sea, the biological clock ticks differently. While small animals at the surface often live only a few years, deep-sea creatures can endure for centuries. Generations here can span decades. It is as if someone pressed the pause button on life, but not quite all the way down. So we now understand that the engine of these giants is extremely efficient. requiring very little fuel in the form of food, and that the cold acts as a brake, slowing everything down and minimizing consumption. But every engine, no matter how efficient, no matter how little fuel it needs, requires one more thing to function: air. Without oxygen, there is no combustion, no energy conversion, no life. And here we run into another mystery. An enormous body is made up of billions of cells, and every single one of them is crying out for oxygen. In warm waters, this would be an impossible logistical problem. Large animals would suffocate from the inside because oxygen simply could not be delivered fast enough to the deepest layers of tissue. But in the polar seas and the deep ocean, nature has found a solution to this problem too. It is the key that allows sea spiders to grow legs like stilts and isopods to become monsters. It is the substance that makes this impossible growth physically possible. So where do these giants find the breath of life in the eternal darkness? The answer leads us directly to an invisible elixir, one that the cold itself creates. We have talked about engines that run on almost no fuel and bodies that function like sealed insulated vaults. But every combustion process, whether in an engine or inside the cells of a living creature, requires one critical ingredient: oxygen. Without it, everything grinds to a halt. To understand this, picture opening a bottle of sparkling water. If that bottle has been sitting in the sun all day and is warm, opening it causes a small explosion. The gas hisses out violently. The water foams over. Why? Because warm water cannot hold gas very well, it wants to escape. Now take a bottle straight from the refrigerator, ice cold, almost at freezing. Open that one and it barely fizzes at all. The gas stays dissolved in the water. The exact same principle applies to the ocean. Cold water is physically capable of holding far more dissolved oxygen than warm water, and in the waters around Antarctica, where temperatures often drop below freezing and the sea stays liquid only because of its salt content, oxygen levels are extraordinarily high. The ocean here is not simply a body of water. It is an oxygen-rich soup, an absolute paradise for any organism that lives in it. For us humans, this makes little difference, since we draw our oxygen from the air. But for marine animals that must filter it directly from the water, this is the difference between scarcity and pure abundance, and no creature exploits this abundance quite as remarkably as the sea spiders, known scientifically as pycnogonids. You may have seen a small, delicate spider with thin legs scuttling along in a damp corner somewhere. A typical sea spider in a warm reef or in temperate coastal waters looks similar, but it is tiny, often only a few millimeters to a couple of centimeters across. You could easily overlook one entirely, mistaking it for a speck on a rock. But when we descend into the Southern Ocean, we meet their relatives, and what we find could be a scene from a nightmare. Down here, animals that are genetically almost identical grow to monstrous sizes. Antarctic sea spiders reach leg spans of more than 50 centimeters, some even up to 70 centimeters. That is larger than the steering wheel of a car. If one of these landed on your face, its legs would extend well past your ears. Why does nature do this? Why do these particular spiders grow so enormous? The answer lies in their anatomy and in oxygen. Sea spiders are strange creatures. They essentially have no body to speak of. They are almost entirely legs. Their torso is so tiny that their internal organs, their digestive system, their reproductive organs, are housed inside their legs. And critically, they have no lungs and no gills. These animals breathe through simple diffusion. Oxygen from the water must pass directly through their tough outer skin and into their tissue. This is an extremely inefficient process, and physically, diffusion places a hard limit on how large an animal can grow. The bigger an animal becomes, the more volume it has that needs to be supplied with oxygen. But the surface area, the skin through which oxygen enters, grows much more slowly than the volume does. This is the classic surface area to volume problem that gives every biology student a headache. In warm water, this limit is reached quickly. If a sea spider in a warm coastal pool grew to the size of a dinner plate, it would suffocate from the inside. Oxygen simply could not penetrate fast enough to reach the cells deep within its legs. It would die long before it finished growing, but in the icy polar seas, everything changes. Here, the oxygen barrier is broken. Because the water holds so much more dissolved oxygen, the pressure pushing that oxygen into the body is far greater. Oxygen diffuses deeper, faster, and more efficiently into the tissue. The physical limit that normally keeps these animals small simply disappears. Evolution is like an accelerator. When there is no resistance, it pushes through. Since the limiting factor oxygen scarcity is removed, these spiders were free to grow larger and larger over millions of years. Nothing was stopping them. At the same time, the slow metabolism we discussed earlier helps them use less oxygen overall. It is the perfect combination. An enormous supply of oxygen meets a minimal demand for it. The result is spiders the size of dogs. This phenomenon is called polar gigantism. It differs slightly from classic deep-sea gigantism, even though the two often go hand in hand. In the deep sea, pressure and food scarcity tend to be the primary drivers. In the polar regions, it is primarily the cold and the oxygen. The colossal squid, which we met earlier, is a double winner because it lives both deep and cold. But the sea spiders are the true children of the cold. So what do these giants do with those long legs? They are not fast hunters. Remember the energy-saving mode we talked about. These giant spiders move at an almost ghostly pace across the seafloor. They use their long legs like stilts, stepping carefully over obstacles such as sponges and corals. They are not fighters, they are vacuum cleaners. They possess a long feeding tube called a proboscis, which they use to pierce their prey, often soft-bodied animals like sea anemones or hydroids, sometimes even sea stars, and then drain their bodily fluids. The way someone might slowly sip a thick milkshake through a straw. It is a slow, grim death for the prey, but a highly efficient way for the spider to extract nutrients. Even the prey itself is not normal down here. The sea stars these spiders feed on are themselves gigantic. Some Antarctic sea stars have not 5 arms, as we are used to seeing, but as many as 50, and they too reach impressive sizes. It becomes a battle of titans in slow motion, an enormous sea star against an enormous spider, in a world so cold that every movement takes an eternity. There is another fascinating aspect to this oxygen abundance. It allows animals not just to grow large, but to develop structures that would otherwise be too costly to maintain. A larger body retains heat better, or in this case, cools more slowly and remains thermally more stable against small fluctuations. This is Bergman's rule again, usually cited for warm-blooded animals, but casting its shadow here as well. But let us pause for a moment. We now understand why these creatures can grow large, and why they must grow large. But there is one dimension we have not yet considered, one that our fast-paced human world tends to forget: time. A giant like this does not appear overnight. A common woodlouse in your garden might live 1 or 2 years. A house spider rarely makes it past 3. But in the cold of the deep sea and the polar oceans, time moves differently. Everything is slowed, growth, movement, even dying. When we look at these enormous spiders, we are not looking at young creatures that hatched last summer. We are looking at ancient beings. And that brings us to a question that scientists struggled with for a long time. If these animals grow so slowly and live so slowly, how old do they actually get? There is one animal that takes this relationship with time to its absolute extreme. A vertebrate that was already swimming through the oceans when kings and empires ruled over Europe, and when the streets of our cities were still lit by whale oil. We now leave behind the world of spiders and squid, and turn to the true master of time, a shark so slow it seems almost frozen in place, and yet one that outlives every other vertebrate on the planet. Prepare to meet living history. Time is a concept that feels rigid and unforgiving to us as humans. We measure our lives in seconds, hours, and years. We celebrate milestone birthdays, dread our first grey hairs, and chase eternal youth. A human life of 80 or 90 years feels long to us, filled with events, crises, and moments of joy. But if we turn our gaze northward, into the icy, ink-black waters of the Arctic and the North Atlantic, our human definition of old age loses all meaning. Down there, at depths approaching 2,000 meters, where the water temperature ranges from just below freezing to around 7 degrees, a shadow drifts through the darkness. It moves so slowly that you would need to look twice just to confirm it is moving at all. It is not a predator brimming with energy, the way sharks are often portrayed on screen. It is a grey, scarred giant that looks more like a drifting boulder than a fish. This is the Greenland shark, sometimes called the grey shark of the deep. It is the true elder of the seas, the unchallenged keeper of time. To grasp just how old these animals can become, let us take a small journey through history. Imagine a great stone cathedral, the kind that took centuries to build. Now picture a Greenland shark swimming through the Arctic waters today. This shark could have already been alive when the 30 Years' War began tearing Europe apart, when witch trials were still being held across the continent, and when the Holy Roman Empire was fighting for its very survival. This shark was already swimming as a young pup through the polar seas. Centuries before any of that, scientific studies have determined that these animals can reach ages of at least 272 years, with some individuals estimated to be over 500 years old. This makes the Greenland shark the longest-lived vertebrate on Earth. It was already alive before Columbus crossed the Atlantic. It was alive while Michelangelo painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. It was alive while the Aztec and Inca empires still flourished before they were destroyed by Spanish conquest. It is a living fossil, one that breathes history, or perhaps more accurately, filters it through its gills. But how is this possible? How can an organism made of flesh and blood, governed by the same biological rules as any other animal, delay decay for so long? The answer, once again, lies in the cold and in metabolism. The Greenland shark has taken the principle of slowing down, something our fast-paced modern world is only just rediscovering the value of, and turned it into the ultimate survival art. In its frozen habitat, every bodily process unfolds in extreme slow motion. Its heart beats only a handful of times per minute. It swims at less than a kilometre per hour. Its metabolism is so unbelievably low that it barely consumes any energy at all. It is, in a sense, a biological refrigerator that never needs defrosting. This extreme cold acts as a preservative. It slows cell division, it slows aging, it slows death itself. But this life lived in slow motion has some strange consequences. Everything about this shark takes forever. While a human reaches adolescence around 13 or 14 years old, the Greenland shark takes its time, a great deal of time. These animals do not reach sexual maturity until they are roughly 150 years old. Sit with that fact for a moment. A shark must survive a century and a half, avoiding every danger the ocean can throw at it, never being eaten, never ending up in a fishing net, just to become capable of reproducing. A childhood longer than 2 entire human lifetimes combined. This also explains why this species is so dangerously vulnerable to overfishing. Killing one mature Greenland shark does not just remove a single animal. It erases an investment of centuries of biological history. But how do we know any of this so precisely? Sharks do not carry identification papers, and you cannot simply ask one its age. For a long time, scientists were stumped. Unlike bony fish, which often form growth rings in their ear bones, similar to growth rings in a tree, sharks have cartilage skeletons that retain almost no such record. The solution was found in one of the most unusual places imaginable, inside the shark's eye. Within the lens of the eye are special proteins that form while the shark is still an embryo. These proteins are metabolically inert, meaning the body never replaces or renews them. They sit there, unchanged, like a sealed time capsule from the moment of birth. Around this core, new layers of the lens grow throughout the animal's life, like the layers of an onion. By extracting the core of the lens and analysing it using radiocarbon dating, scientists could determine when these proteins originally formed. And in a strange twist of history, The nuclear bomb tests of the 1950s and 1960s actually helped with this. Those tests released large amounts of radioactive carbon into the atmosphere, which eventually made its way into the oceans. This radioactive signature, known as the bomb pulse, acts as a perfect time marker. A shark whose eye lens contains none of this carbon must have been born before that period. Through complex mathematical modelling, researchers were able to estimate the age of a 5-metre-long female shark at somewhere between 272 and as much as 512 years. When we look closely at these ancient wanderers, something else becomes apparent, something both fascinating and unsettling. Many of these sharks have a milky, almost lifeless look to their eyes, and indeed, most Greenland sharks are blind. The cause is a small parasitic crustacean, a copepod known scientifically as Omatocoita elongata. This parasite attaches itself to the cornea of the shark's eye, hanging there and gradually consuming the surface tissue, eventually causing severe damage and blindness. For us, the idea of living with a parasite latched onto our eyeball is the stuff of nightmares. We would be driven to panic. But the Greenland shark endures it with the calm detachment of a creature that has lived in darkness for centuries. In the lightless depths, where it would see nothing anyway, eyes are almost unnecessary. It relies instead on an extraordinarily sensitive sense of smell and on electromagnetic detection. Some researchers once speculated that the parasite itself might glow, attracting prey in a strange form of symbiosis, but this idea is now considered unlikely. It is, more probably, simply a parasite, and the shark lives with it because it has no hands to remove it, a blind, extremely slow elder, drifting through the darkness. How does an animal like this survive at all? What does a predator eat when it moves so slowly that even a pregnant seal could probably swim away from it with ease? Here we see the true adaptability of this giant. It is not a picky eater, it is an opportunist. It eats whatever drifts down to it. Inside the stomachs of Greenland sharks, researchers have found fish and squid, which is expected, but they have also found things that have no business being there at all. Remains of reindeer, horses, and even polar bears. How does a blind, slow-moving shark end up consuming one of the most dangerous predators on the planet? If a polar bear dies in a fight, or drowns while swimming and sinks to the bottom, the Greenland shark is there. If a reindeer falls through the ice, or a dead horse is swept out to sea by a river, the shark waits. It is the ultimate recycler of the Arctic, comparable to a vulture only underwater. Its size, up to 7 meters and over 1,400 kilograms, allows it to consume enormous quantities of carrion and then store that energy for months within its slow-burning system. It does not need to hunt quickly. It does not need to sprint. It simply needs to be present when death delivers a rich meal from above and lets it sink slowly into its domain. It is the cleanup crew of the North Atlantic, a garbage collector of truly majestic proportions. It cleans the ocean and turns death into life, into a very, very long life. This dependence on dead biomass falling from the world of light above is not just essential for the Greenland shark, it is the founding principle of the entire deep sea. While the shark takes the big occasional prizes, a dead bear or a lost reindeer, the rest of the deep sea community waits for something far finer and far more constant. We touched briefly earlier on the term marine snow, but what exactly is it, and what happens when? Instead of a single drowned animal, the largest organism on the planet dies and becomes a feast for an entire community of deep-sea creatures on the ocean floor. This brings us to the most spectacular food source the deep sea has to offer, the whale fall. The death of such a giant secures the survival of thousands and demonstrates beautifully that in the deep sea, absolutely nothing goes to waste. We left the Greenland shark behind in the darkness, slowly chewing on a dead reindeer that unfortunately fell through the ice. For this shark, life, hard as it may be, is at least occasionally a feast. It is large enough and mobile enough to find the rare big windfalls that make their way down into the depths. But the Greenland shark is the exception, the king among scavengers. what about everyone else? What about the billions of small and medium-sized creatures that populate the seafloor, from the vast abyssal plains to the deepest trenches? When you think about feeding in the deep sea, you first need to abandon every assumption you have from life at the surface. Up in the light, energy is abundant. Plants and algae convert sunlight into sugar. Small animals eat algae. Large animals eat small animals. It is a wild, pulsing buffet, but below about 200 meters, light begins to fade. In the abyss, it is permanent night. No sunlight means no photosynthesis. No photosynthesis means no plants. Biologically speaking, the deep sea is cut off from production entirely. It is like an enormous factory floor where the machines stand still and the workers wait for the boss upstairs to occasionally drop a care package through the skylight. This constant waiting for food from above is the only foundation of life for almost everything that crawls and drifts down here. Scientists have given this steady, quiet transfer of biomass a term that sounds almost poetic, but is in reality fairly unglamorous. Marine snow. Picture yourself standing inside a vast, dark, silent stone cathedral in winter. From the distant ceiling, tiny white flakes drift down, slowly, almost imperceptibly. But these flakes are not frozen water. They are the remains of life from the surface above. Dead plankton, the empty shells of small crustaceans, clumps of algae debris, and, to put it plainly, enormous quantities of fecal matter from fish and whales, all sinking slowly over weeks and months into the abyss. This organic material is the fuel of the deep sea, but it is an extremely poor fuel. As this snow falls through the water column, it gets eaten and excreted again and again. Bacteria break it down. Mid-water fish snatch up the best pieces. By the time it finally reaches the bottom, at depths of 4,000 or 6,000 meters, what remains is often little more than chemical leftovers, with almost all the usable energy already stripped away. It is as if these creatures were trying to survive on crumbs that fell under the table after a massive banquet, crumbs that 3 other guests had already trampled over. Some animals have become extremely specialized at catching this fine rain. The vampire squid, for example, a resident of the oxygen minimum zone, is not the blood-drinking monster its name suggests. It is a harmless collector of debris. It extends 2 long, sticky filaments like fishing lines into the falling snow, gathering particles before slowly drawing them in to feed, but you do not become a giant on dust alone. Marine snow sustains life, but it rarely fuels explosions of biomass. Yet sometimes, very rarely, something miraculous happens. The grey monotony of the seafloor is interrupted by an event that, for the creatures of the deep, is the equivalent of winning the lottery. A whale dies. When a great whale, a blue whale, a fin whale, or a sperm whale dies at the surface and is not washed ashore, its enormous body, containing tons of flesh, fat, and bone, sinks into the depths. This is called a whale fall. When that body strikes the seafloor, it transforms the surrounding environment instantly. Imagine, in the middle of a vast empty desert, an entire fully stocked grocery store suddenly falling from the sky. A single whale carcass delivers as much food to one spot as would normally arrive over roughly 2,000 years in the form of marine snow. It is a biological bomb. What follows can only be compared to the chaos of a massive sale, the kind of rush where people push and shove for the best deals. It is pure chaos, but organized chaos. First come the mobile scavengers, sharks like the Greenland shark or sleeper sharks, hagfish, and large bony fish. They tear away the big chunks of flesh. This can take months, but when they are finished, the feast is far from over. Then comes the turn of the invertebrates, the true heroes of our story of gigantism. Giant isopods and amphipods stream in from kilometers away. They have an extraordinarily fine sense of smell, capable of detecting the scent of decay in the water, and here we see the evolutionary advantage of their size in full display. Remember the storage principle. When a giant isopod arrives at a whale fall, there is no holding back. It eats and eats and eats. These animals can stretch their stomachs to such an extreme degree that it actually changes the shape of their entire body. They eat themselves into a state that we might compare to the food coma after an enormous holiday meal, only far more extreme. They eat so much that they become physically immobile. Their legs barely touch the ground anymore because their bellies are so distended. They sacrifice their own mobility for caloric intake. That sounds risky. An animal that cannot move should be easy prey. But at a whale fall, everyone is full. And afterward, these animals bury themselves in the sediment and live off this single feast for what can be years. A giant isopod that has gorged itself at a whale fall can theoretically survive for up to 5 years without taking another bite. The size of its body acts as an enormous storage tank, a battery that gets charged once and then lasts almost indefinitely. But the deep sea has even more surprises in store. Researchers have recently discovered that some of these giants are not only waiting for flesh. In the deepest trenches on Earth, including the Mariana Trench, scientists found enormous amphipods that have tapped into an entirely different, completely unexpected food source. Every so often, instead of an animal, what sinks into the depths is a tree trunk, driftwood, washed out to sea by rivers, soaked through and eventually sinking to the bottom. Normally, wood is extremely difficult for animals to digest. We cannot eat it at all. Termites need special bacteria to break it down, but these deep-sea amphipods have evolved their own enzyme, a specialized cellulase, that allows them to convert wood fiber directly into glucose, into sugar. This is, scientifically speaking, remarkable. In a world without plants, these animals have learned to digest the remains of plants from an entirely different habitat, the land. And even more astonishing, the activity of this enzyme actually increases under high pressure. The deeper the trench, the higher the pressure, the more efficiently the amphipod digests the wood. It is as if evolution crafted a tool that only reaches peak performance under the most extreme conditions imaginable. This ability to extract energy from almost anything, whether it is dust from dead algae, the carcass of a whale or an old log, is the key to survival down here. The giants of the deep sea are not picky gourmets. They are the ultimate recyclers of the planet. Nothing is wasted. Every unit of energy that the sun once produced at the surface eventually finds its way into the stomach of one of these creatures. But this extreme dependence on the surface also makes the deep sea vulnerable. This ecosystem is not the isolated, separate world we once believed it to be. It is the shadow of our world. When we overfish the oceans, when we alter the climate and disrupt plankton production, we are, in effect, cutting off the supply line to the giants below. The marine snow grows thinner and there are fewer whales. We have now seen how these animals fuel their enormous bodies. We know they are opportunists. But in a world where food is this scarce, simply waiting for the next meal is not enough. Sometimes an animal must actively defend itself or shape its body in a way that grants it that crucial extra reach in the darkness. This brings us to a creature we touched on earlier, but one that deserves a closer look. An animal that looks like a mechanical construction from a dystopian film, walking across the seafloor on stilt-like legs, always searching for the next scrap. Let us take a closer look at the anatomy of a creature that is, in truth, entirely harmless, unless you happen to be a dead seagull or a dead fish, the Japanese spider crab. When we think of aliens of life forms wandering across the surface of some distant world, we often picture images straight out of classic science fiction. Towering, dark, mechanical structures looming silently over an alien landscape. But we do not need to travel to another planet to witness scenes like that. We simply need to travel to the waters off Japan and descend deep into the mesopelagic and bathypelagic zones. There in the darkness walks a creature that puts those science fiction visions to shame. The Japanese spider crab. Let us for a moment shift our point of view. Imagine the scene through the eyes of a small fish searching for food along the seafloor. Suddenly, columns appear ahead, orange and white armoured pillars rising up and seemingly endless in the dim light. You look upward and realise these columns are legs that connect to a body hovering meters above you. This animal is the largest living arthropod on the planet. When we say large, we mean dimensions that should, by all rights, be physically impossible for a crustacean. Its leg span can reach up to 4 meters. To make that tangible, picture a small compact car. This animal's legs could comfortably arch over that car without touching it. Or imagine a room with high ceilings. If you hung this crab on the wall, its legs would stretch from floor to ceiling, and likely beyond. But why does this animal look this way? Why would nature design a crab that is almost entirely legs, with a body so small in comparison that it looks like an armoured fist at the centre of a sprawling frame? The answer is a combination of defence, reach, and the physics of water. Let us start with defence. In shallower waters, crabs are often prey, hunted by octopuses, large fish, and otters. The strategy there is usually to hide, to stay small, to duck under rocks or burrow into sand. But in the open expanse of the deep sea, there are few places to hide. If you cannot hide, you must become a fortress. The Japanese spider crab is essentially armour on stilts. Its exoskeleton is extremely hard and thick, but its true defence is its sheer size. A predator does not just need to crack the shell. It needs to be able to handle the animal at all. Who would willingly attack a 4-meter wide spiked giant? The size alone is a deterrent. Most potential predators in these depths are simply too small to take on something this large. This is what biologists call release from predation pressure. Because almost nothing can eat them, evolution had free rein to let them grow even larger. The second factor is reach. As we learned earlier, food in the deep sea is scarce and scattered. Carrion does not pile up in one place. It is spread thin across the seafloor. The crab's long legs serve not just as a means of locomotion, but dramatically extend its foraging radius. Imagine sitting at a dinner table, but your arms are 3 meters long. You could reach the salt shaker across the room without ever standing up. That is essentially what this crab does. With its long claws, it can sweep across a huge area of seafloor searching for food without ever having to move its heavy body. This conserves enormous amounts of energy. It probes through the mud, grabs dead fish, scraps of algae, or soft-bodied animals, and slowly, almost mechanically, brings them to its mouth. Its movements are never hurried. It walks slowly, deliberately, like a machine from another era. This deliberate movement also has a physical explanation that is often overlooked: viscosity of water. At depth, under high pressure and low temperatures, water behaves differently than it does at the surface. It feels thicker to these animals, almost syrupy. A small body has to expend a great deal of energy fighting through this resistance. A large body with long limbs has a hydrodynamic advantage here. The spider crab does not glide, it strides. It uses its long legs to overcome the resistance of the water and move efficiently across great distances. It is perfectly adapted to the fluid mechanics of the deep, despite its fearsome appearance and its heavy armour. The Japanese spider crab has one moment in its life when it is as vulnerable as a newborn kitten, and this moment is the price it pays for its size. Like all crustaceans, it has an exoskeleton, and that shell does not grow along with the animal. As the crab grows, and it does so throughout a life that can last for decades, it must molt. Imagine wearing a suit of armour that has become a size too small. To take it off, you have to twist and pull your soft body out of a rigid shell that no longer fits. For the Japanese spider crab, this is a logistical nightmare. It must withdraw its meter-long legs from the old shell without getting stuck or tearing a limb off. This process can take hours, and once it is complete, the crab is left completely soft for several days. Until the new shell hardens through contact with seawater, this giant is utterly defenseless, essentially a 4-meter mass of jelly. During this time, it hides as best it can, hoping no ray or shark happens to pass by. It is the only moment in which the king of the seafloor can be dethroned. But once the new shell hardens, it once again becomes the undisputed ruler of its domain. Many of these crabs decorate their shells with sponges and other small organisms for additional camouflage. A slow-moving reef drifting through the dark, It is somewhat ironic that we so often call these creatures monsters, when in truth they are some of the most peaceful giants imaginable. They are the cleanup crew, the gardeners of the seafloor. They do not hunt aggressively, they do not kill out of aggression, they simply tidy up. They turn the death of other animals into new life. Their existence is proof that evolution under extreme conditions finds extreme solutions. The pressure, the cold and the darkness here did not produce a fast, agile predator, but rather a patient armoured machine. So far, we have spoken about pressure only as an abstract concept. We have said it is high. But what does that actually mean? What does it really mean physically when kilometers of water press down on something? The Japanese spider crab typically lives at depths of 300 to 400 meters, sometimes deeper, but it has not yet reached the true bottom of the world. There are places far deeper still, places where even this armoured crab would be crushed like an eggshell. Let us leave behind these moderate depths and plunge into the true abyss. We are heading to the deepest point on the surface of the Earth, a place fewer humans have visited than the surface of the Moon. Down there in the Mariana Trench, the pressure reaches levels so far beyond our imagination that it seems to alter matter itself. And yet, something lives there. How do you survive when the weight of dozens of jumbo jets bears down on you from above? The Japanese spider crab occupies the upper floors of the deep sea, so to speak. Now we descend into the basement, into the very foundation of the world. Our destination is the Mariana Trench in the Western Pacific, and specifically its deepest point, the Challenger Deep. At nearly 11,000 meters, it is the deepest known point in the Earth's crust. To grasp this scale, we need to stop thinking horizontally and start thinking vertically. Let us try a thought experiment. Take Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on the planet, and drop it into this trench. It would not just disappear entirely. Its peak would still sit more than 2 kilometers below the surface of the water. But the real challenge down here is not the darkness, and it is not the cold, it is the pressure. At 11,000 meters, the column of water above generates a pressure of roughly 1,100 atmospheres. That is a number so abstract our minds can barely process it. Let us try to make it tangible. Imagine lying on the ground while someone places an entire steel television tower, foundation and all, directly on your chest. Or, to use a more classic image, it is as if an elephant were balancing on a postage stamp. When humans descend to these depths in our most advanced submersibles, we sit inside spheres made of solid titanium or specialized steel, with walls thicker than the vault of a bank, and even then, the metal groans under the strain. If a window had even the faintest hairline crack, water would rush in with such violent force that it would slice through everything inside like a laser before the entire vessel imploded in milliseconds. So how is it possible that anything lives down there at all? How can a creature made of flesh, blood and thin membranes exist in a place where hardened steel reaches its limits? The answer is surprisingly simple, and it comes down to physics. These animals do not fight the pressure. They become one with it. We humans are so vulnerable to pressure because our bodies contain air-filled cavities, our lungs, our sinuses, our inner ears. Gas is compressible. Under enormous pressure, the air in our lungs would be crushed down to the size of a pea, while the rest of our body would be crushed along with it. It would be a horrific way to die. The animals of the Hadal Zone, creatures like snailfish and giant amphipods, solved this problem by eliminating it entirely. They have no air-filled cavities, no swim bladders, nothing that could be compressed. Their bodies are made almost entirely of water and gelatinous tissue, and water is, for all practical purposes, incompressible. If you take a water-filled balloon down into the depths, it barely changes shape because the water inside pushes back with exactly the same force as the water pressing in from outside. These animals are not armoured fortresses keeping the pressure out, they are open systems. The pressure passes straight through them. They do not experience those 1100 atmospheres as a crushing weight. any more than we feel the single atmosphere of pressure resting on our own shoulders right now. But simply not being crushed is only half the battle. The much bigger problem at this depth happens on a molecular level in the chemistry of life itself. Under extreme pressure, biological processes begin to fail. Proteins, the building blocks of life, are complex, folded three-dimensional structures, and their function depends entirely on their shape. High pressure forces these proteins to deform, to unfold. They denature. It is like trying to build an intricate structure out of building blocks while someone keeps stepping on your hands. Enzymes stop working. Cell membranes become rigid, like butter left in the freezer. By all rights, no cell should be able to function down here. But evolution would not be evolution if it had not found a chemical workaround. The creatures of the Mariana Trench have developed a kind of countermeasure against pressure. Researchers have found extremely high concentrations of compounds known as piezolites in the cells of hadal animals. The most well-known of these is trimethylamine oxide, or TMAO. This molecule acts like a chemical scaffold. It binds to water molecules and forces them into a structure that helps proteins maintain their shape, even as the ocean tries to crush them flat. The deeper a fish lives, the more TMAO it carries in its cells, a direct, linear relationship. And here is a curious fact from everyday life. When TMAO breaks down, it produces trimethylamine, which happens to be the exact compound responsible for that familiar fishy smell. The fact that ocean fish smell the way they do is, in a strange sense, evidence of their ongoing battle against pressure and osmotic balance. The deepest fish on Earth are, quite literally, saturated with this substance. Scientists believe there may even be a theoretical limit to how deep a fish can live. At around 8,200 meters, the concentration of TMAO required would become so high that the fish's internal fluids would actually become saltier than the surrounding seawater. Osmosis would reverse, and the fish would swell and burst. This is likely why, in the very deepest parts of the Mariana Trench, at 11,000 meters, we no longer find fish at all, only invertebrates like crustaceans and sea cucumbers, which rely on different biochemical tricks entirely. A perfect example of life pushed to the absolute edge of what is possible is the Mariana snailfish, filmed at depths approaching 8,000 meters. Forget everything you know about monsters. This fish does not look terrifying at all. It looks like a pale pink, almost translucent tadpole. It has no scales. Its skin is so thin you can see its liver through its belly. It looks fragile, almost endearing. And yet this small, soft fish survives conditions that would put the best submarines on Earth to the ultimate test. It is the unchallenged ruler of this depth, simply because nothing else can survive there to challenge it. Even deeper, buried in the sediment at the very bottom of the Challenger Deep, we find the giant amphipod, Hirundelia gigas. It reminds us that pressure is not only an enemy, it can also be a tool. Remember that enzyme we discussed earlier, the one that lets these amphipods digest wood. Scientists discovered that this enzyme does not work worse under high pressure, it works better. The higher the pressure, the more efficiently it breaks down cellulose. These animals have integrated extreme pressure directly into their metabolism. They need it to function at their best. If we bring them up to the surface, into our comfortable atmospheric pressure, they do not just die from decompression. Their internal chemistry collapses entirely. In a sense, they suffocate from too much warmth and too little pressure, the exact opposite of what kills us. The water down here has another property we can barely imagine: viscosity. Because of the cold and the pressure, water molecules behave differently. The water itself becomes thicker. For small organisms, it must feel like trying to swim through honey. This may be yet another reason so many deep-sea animals grow large. A bigger body has more momentum and force to push through this dense medium. A tiny plankton organism or small crustacean down here has to expend far more energy to move than it would near the surface. Being large, then, is also a matter of hydrodynamics in a syrupy world. When we look around this crushing, lightless world, something becomes apparent. The animals here, the snailfish, the amphipods, the sea cucumbers, often look as though they belong to another era. They appear primitive, simple, almost ancient, and this is no coincidence. The Mariana Trench and the deep plains of the ocean in general are places of absolute stability. While continents drift, ice ages come and go, meteorites strike, and civilizations rise and fall at the surface, down here everything remains the same. Cold, dark, and under pressure forever. This eternal constancy has a fascinating effect on evolution. While evolution at the surface is often a frantic race, a constant scramble to adapt to new climates and new threats, down here it has taken its foot off the gas entirely. Why change if the world around you has not changed in 50 million years? We are looking into a window of the past. We are looking at animals that are, in a sense, frozen in time. When we think of evolution, we often picture a frantic arms race. We think of the open plains where the antelope must become faster to escape the predator, and the predator must become even faster still to avoid starving. We think of viruses mutating within months to outpace our immune systems. Evolution to us is change. It is adaptation. It is the constant drive towards something new, fueled by the struggle to survive in an ever-shifting world. But when we leave the surface behind and descend into the eternal darkness of the deep sea, it feels as though someone hit the slow motion button, or perhaps even the pause button entirely. Down here, different rules apply. Evolution is not a frantic trader reacting to every fluctuation on the market. It is more like an archivist in a dusty basement, turning a single page every few centuries. Many of the creatures we have encountered, the giant isopods, the vampire squid, the ancient sharks, are what scientists call living fossils. This means that if you stepped into a time machine and travelled back 50 or even 100 million years to an era when dinosaurs roamed the land and entire mountain ranges had not yet formed, you would find almost exactly the same animals living in the deep sea today. A creature from that era would not recognise the world above water at all. But a giant isopod would barely notice anything had changed, beyond, perhaps, a slightly different taste to the water. So why does time seem to stand still down here? The first reason lies in the extreme stability of this habitat. At the surface, life is constant chaos. Ice ages come and go, sea levels rise and fall, continents drift apart, volcanoes reshape entire climates. To survive at the surface, you must be flexible. Adaptation is mandatory or you go extinct. The deep sea, by contrast, is perhaps the most uneventful place in the entire solar system, at least from a geological perspective. At 4,000 meters there are no seasons, there is no summer and no winter, there are no storms, no droughts, no heat waves. The temperature has remained constant, just above freezing, for millions of years. The pressure is always the same, crushing, unchanging. The darkness is absolute. Evolution is typically driven by crisis. When the environment changes, selective pressure follows. Adapt or die. But when the environment never changes, there is no pressure to adapt at all. The design of the giant isopod, or the vampire squid, worked perfectly 100 million years ago, and it works just as well today. Down here, an old engineering principle applies: never fix what is not broken. Why would evolution waste energy redesigning an organism that is already perfectly suited to its niche? In a world without change, innovation is not an advantage, it is a risk. But it is not just the lack of necessity, it is also the lack of opportunity. And this brings us back to the cold and to chemistry. We already know that cold slows down all chemical reactions. This affects not just digestion or heart rate, but also the molecular processes within DNA itself. Mutations, the random copying errors that drive evolution forward, occur less frequently, and even when they do occur, it takes far longer for them to spread through a population. Consider generational turnover. At the surface, mice and insects reproduce at a blistering pace. A fruit fly can have great-grandchildren within 2 weeks. That means evolution gets hundreds of chances per year to test new variations. In the deep sea, the clock runs very differently. Remember the Greenland shark, which does not reach maturity until it is around 150 years old, or the giant isopods, which can live for decades. If a single generation takes 50 years or more, evolution simply has far fewer opportunities to act. A single evolutionary step that takes mere days for surface bacteria can take thousands of years down here. Biological time itself is, in a sense, frozen in the polar seas and the deep ocean. This leads to a fascinating reproductive strategy biologists call K-selection. In nature, there are broadly two paths to ensuring a species survives. The first is what we might call the scattershot approach. Produce thousands of offspring, but invest little energy in any individual one, hoping that out of 5,000 eggs, perhaps 2 or 3 will survive. This is the strategy of many surface-dwelling fish. The giants of the deep sea take the opposite path, quality over quantity. In a habitat that is stable but desperately poor in resources, it makes no sense to send thousands of offspring out into near-certain starvation. Instead, animals like certain deep-sea octopuses and large grenadier fish produce only a small number of eggs, but those eggs are enormous, packed with nutrients, essentially a head start in life. Their offspring are born large, strong, and well-developed, giving them a far higher chance of survival than the tiny, drifting larvae of surface fish. But this strategy demands stability. You can only afford to invest so heavily in a single egg if you can be reasonably confident that the world tomorrow will look exactly like the world today. It is, in essence, a contract with eternity. This slowness has a further, almost philosophical consequence. Because energy is so scarce and growth so slow, competition is also far lower than at the surface. On a coral reef, there is constant warfare. Every square centimetre is contested. Corals chemically poison their neighbours. Fish nip and bite one another constantly. In the deep sea, there is space. Population densities are extremely low. Individuals encounter one another rarely. Why develop expensive weapons or elaborate defences when your nearest neighbour might live 3 kilometres away? Many deep-sea animals have lost their aggression entirely or never developed it in the first place. They exist in a kind of peaceful coexistence, dictated by scarcity. So we see that the giants of the deep sea are enormous because they had time, an enormous amount of time. They are the product of an evolution that was never rushed. They were able to grow over millions of years in relative peace, occupy their niches, and perfect strategies like extreme energy conservation, without some faster predator or sudden climate disaster constantly upending everything. They are perfectly adapted to a world of constancy. They are specialists in stability. A colossal squid is not better or worse than an ordinary squid. It is simply the answer to a completely different question, and this is precisely where the problem lies. Specialization is a one-way street. A creature perfectly adapted to one set of conditions is often helpless when those conditions change. Think of a master craftsman who spent his entire life perfecting the art of building wooden carriage wheels. He is the best in the world at it. His wheels are masterpieces, and then the automobile is invented. His perfection becomes obsolete overnight, not because his work was bad, but because the world around him changed completely. The deep sea was stable for 50 million years, but today, in the age of humanity, even this fortress of permanence is beginning to crack. We are changing the chemistry of the oceans. We are warming the water. We are sending plastic all the way down into the Mariana Trench. What happens when you take a world built for slow motion and cold and suddenly shift it into fast forward and heat? What happens to animals that need centuries to adapt when we transform their environment within mere decades? The stability that created these giants may now become their downfall. Because evolution cannot be rushed simply because we are in a hurry, let us now leave the biological foundations behind and turn to the threat creeping invisibly but relentlessly into the depths. It is a threat that arrives not with teeth or claws but with molecules and degrees. Are the days of these giants numbered? We have painted a picture of creatures that seem almost unstoppable. We have admired the armoured body of the giant isopod, built like a military vehicle. We have marvelled at the rotating hooks of the colossal squid and the sheer resilience of a shark that endures for centuries. It seems as though nothing could shake these rulers of the dark. They survived the impact that wiped out the dinosaurs. They shrugged off the shifting of continents. They appear as solid as bedrock against the tide of history. But this impression is deeply misleading. It is one of nature's most tragic ironies. The very factors that turn these animals into giants, extreme stability, the cold, the abundance of oxygen, are now their greatest weaknesses. Consider, by comparison, a high-precision mechanical timepiece, the kind of masterwork built to run accurately to the millisecond under very specific, controlled conditions. It is an extraordinary feat of engineering, but take that watch, designed for a cool, sterile environment, and place it in a sauna. The gears expand. The lubricant becomes too thin. The springs lose their tension. The entire system, no matter how perfect it once was, collapses because it has zero tolerance for deviation. The giants of the deep sea and the polar oceans are exactly like that watch. They are specialized for a world that has not changed in millions of years. And now, within the blink of an eye on a geological timescale, within mere decades of human industrial activity, we are radically altering the parameters of their world. The biggest problem is not simply that the water is getting warmer and the animals feel uncomfortable. The real problem is a deadly pincer attack, two physiological mechanisms working against each other simultaneously. The first arm of this pincer is oxygen. Remember the sparkling water principle. Cold water holds on to gas, warm water releases it. As the oceans warm, and they are warming even at frightening depths, oxygen levels inevitably and unavoidably decline. The oxygen-rich paradise that made it possible for sea spiders and amphipods to grow so large is being slowly drained away. The second arm of the pincer is metabolism. Deep sea animals are cold-blooded. Their body temperature, and therefore their metabolic rate, is directly determined by the temperature of the surrounding water. As the water warms, the chemical reactions inside their cells speed up. The engine that once idled along in perfect efficiency suddenly begins to rev higher, and this is where the trap closes. Warmer water forces these giants' bodies to burn more energy. They suddenly need more oxygen to fuel this increased metabolism, but at the very same time, that same warmer water means less oxygen is available. Demand rises sharply just as supply collapses. It is the equivalent of ordering a marathon runner to double their pace while simultaneously restricting their airway. Scientists call this scenario the oxygen temperature squeeze. For the giants of the deep, this leads to a state of chronic oxygen deprivation. They do not suffocate immediately, but they live in a permanent state of undersupply, and the consequences are already visible. Studies have shown that the maximum body size of animals like Antarctic sea spiders is already shrinking in areas where the water has warmed even slightly. The very largest individuals are the first to die. Why? Because they are already living at the absolute limit. A smaller body has an easier time getting oxygen to its innermost cells. A massive body, with long legs and thick tissue, has far greater distances for that oxygen to travel. When oxygen levels drop, the innermost regions of the body simply stop receiving enough. These animals are, in effect, suffocating because of their own size. This is especially dramatic for the colossal squid. Remember, its entire existence is built around surviving on roughly 45 calories a day. Its whole lifestyle, the patient waiting in the darkness, depends on having an extraordinarily slow metabolism. If temperatures in the Southern Ocean rise, its metabolism is forced to speed up. It suddenly burns more calories simply to exist. That means it can no longer simply wait. It would need to hunt more often, but it is not built to hunt. It has no muscles for sustained pursuit. It would fall into an energy deficit it cannot recover from. On top of that, warmer temperatures could disrupt its development entirely. If juveniles grow faster but cannot find enough food to match that growth, they may never reach the gigantic proportions of their parents. It is entirely possible that in a warmer world, the colossal squid does not go extinct but simply shrinks. It would become, in a sense, decolossal, an ordinary, mid-sized squid, a tragic diminishment of one of nature's true wonders. And it is not only individuals who are affected. The entire deep-sea ecosystem, as we have learned, is built on stability. It is like a house of cards. Pull out one card, in this case temperature, and the whole structure becomes unstable. Take whale falls, for example. As surface waters warm, life there changes too. Plankton distributions shift, whale migration routes change. If fewer whales die in certain regions, or if currents carry their bodies elsewhere, the supply line for the scavengers below collapses. The giant isopods and amphipods wait, and nothing comes. Another often overlooked problem is ocean acidification. The ocean absorbs much of the carbon dioxide we release into the atmosphere, and this makes the water more acidic. For animals with calcium-based shells, like many crustaceans and mollusks, building and maintaining those shells becomes increasingly difficult. In the deep, where high pressure already makes shell formation challenging, a more acidic ocean could mean that the armour of these giants literally begins to dissolve, or that they must spend enormous amounts of energy maintaining it, energy they simply do not have. Some researchers have warned that we may be heading toward a mass extinction in the deep sea, one that could happen entirely without our noticing. Simply because it is so far away, we see the wildfires. We see the bleaching of coral reefs, but who is watching the slow disappearance of amphipods in the Mariana Trench? It is a silent extinction. Picture a great cathedral slowly crumbling away, but hidden beneath an enormous tarp where no one can see it. That is what is happening to the biological cathedrals of the deep. These animals are living relics. They carry genetic information that is millions of years old. If they disappear, we lose more than just biomass. We lose a library of Earth's history. Is there hope? Life is resilient. Evolution finds a way. Perhaps smaller, more adaptable species will take over the niches left behind by these giants. Perhaps in 1,000 years, the deep sea will be populated by small, fast generalists, in much the same way that rats and pigeons have come to dominate our cities. But the era of these majestic, slow-moving giants, the dinosaurs of the deep, may be coming to an end. And the truly tragic part is that these animals pose absolutely no threat to us. There is not a single documented case of a colossal squid ever killing a human being. They live out their entire existence in a world we cannot even enter without being sealed inside steel capsules. And yet, our influence reaches all the way down to them. Exhaust from a car, or emissions from a power plant on the other side of the world, has direct physical consequences for a giant spider sitting thousands of kilometers away, 4 kilometers deep in total darkness. We have now seen that cold is the key to gigantism, both in a positive sense through the abundance of oxygen it provides, and in a negative sense through the looming trap of climate change. But we have so far blurred together two concepts that scientists keep carefully separate: deep-sea gigantism and polar gigantism. Is a giant squid really the same thing as a giant sea spider? And where exactly does the line fall between deep and cold? Let us pit these two forces against each other and answer the ultimate question: who produces the true monsters? Is it the crushing pressure and eternal night of the deep? Or is it the bitter cold of the polar seas with their oxygen surplus? Let us imagine a contest between two ecosystems. In one corner, deep-sea gigantism. In the other corner, polar gigantism. Let us start with the deep sea. At its core, the deep sea is a place of poverty. Food is scarce. Gigantism here, in animals like the giant isopod or the Japanese spider crab, is a strategy born of scarcity. It is, in a sense, an emergency solution. Imagine a long-distance truck driver crossing a vast desert where the next fuel station might be 1,000 kilometers away. What does he do? He installs an enormous extra fuel tank on his truck. He sacrifices speed and sleekness for storage capacity. That is exactly what deep-sea gigantism is. These animals grow large to carry bigger energy reserves and to cover the long stretches between scarce meals. A larger body is more efficient and lasts longer. Pressure plays a supporting role here, but the true driver is hunger. The giants of the deep are, in essence, survival giants. They grew large in order not to starve. Now let us look at the other corner, the polar seas. Here the situation is completely different. In the shallower waters around Antarctica, where sunlight can reach the seafloor during the summer, food is actually plentiful. Algae bloom. Plankton populations explode. Hunger is not the primary problem here. Instead, what drives growth here is polar gigantism, and its driving force is not scarcity, but pure abundance. Remember the oxygen theory. The icy water holds oxygen in extraordinary abundance. Returning to our truck driver analogy, in the polar seas, fuel oxygen is not just cheap, it is essentially free and flowing in unlimited quantities. With no cost constraint at all, the driver does not build a fuel-efficient vehicle. He builds an enormous, oversized heavy hauler simply because he can. The Antarctic sea spiders and the giant tube worms of the polar seas are products of this abundance. Because oxygen places no limit on them, they simply keep growing. Meanwhile, the cold slows their metabolism so dramatically that they barely need any energy to sustain that mass. The giants of the poles, then, are giants of luxury. They grew large because nothing stopped them. So who wins this contest? Where are the animals truly larger? If we go purely by length, the polar seas often take the lead, especially in shallower waters. The lion's mane jellyfish, for example, is a textbook case of polar gigantism. It lives in the cold waters of the North Atlantic and the Arctic. Its tentacles can stretch to lengths of over 30 meters, longer than a blue whale. Imagine standing on the roof of a 10-story building and lowering a thread all the way to the ground. That is how long this creature can be. Compare that to its relative, the moon jellyfish, which lives in warmer waters and rarely grows larger than a dinner plate. Here, the cold has clearly produced a giant, carried by the density and oxygen content of the water. But when it comes to mass, to sheer monstrous bulk, things get more complicated, because these two effects, deep and cold, do not cancel each other out. They add together. The undisputed king of all invertebrates, the colossal squid, is the result of exactly this lethal combination. It lives in the freezing waters of the Southern Ocean, and at the same time at great depth. It is a case of combined gigantism. It benefits from the oxygen-rich cold and, simultaneously, from the energy efficiency and reduced predation pressure of the deep. The result is an animal weighing between 500 and 700 kilograms. The giant squid, which lives deep but in somewhat more temperate waters, is longer but only about half the weight. When these two gigantism factors join forces, that is when the true monsters emerge. When we turn off the lights at home, it is never truly dark. Even in the most remote corners of a forest or on the darkest winter night, there is always some residual light. The moon, the stars, the distant glow of a city, what we call light pollution, all ensure that our eyes can almost always make out some kind of shape. We are creatures of light, and absolute darkness is for us mostly a theoretical concept, something we might only experience in a windowless basement during a power outage. But in the deep sea, below roughly 1,000 meters, there exists a darkness so complete it feels almost physical. There are no photons here that originated from the sun. By human logic, sight would seem as useless here as sunglasses in a coal mine. Why would any animal invest energy in developing eyes if there is nothing to see? And yet, staring out from this eternal night are eyes so enormous that they put everything at the surface to shame. The unchallenged record holder is, once again, our old friend the colossal squid. Its eyes can reach a diameter of up to 30 centimeters. Take a standard football and hold it up in front of your face. That is the size of a single eye on this animal. These are the largest eyes in the entire animal kingdom. But why? Why would a creature living in absolute blackness develop optical instruments the size of dinner plates? The answer leads us into a world that is not black at all, but filled with sparkling lights. bioluminescence. Picture driving down an unlit highway at night. You turn off your headlights. At first you see nothing, but then, slowly, tiny points of light begin to appear. The glow of a cigarette in the car ahead of you, the blink of a distant radio tower, the dashboard lights of a passing vehicle. In the deep sea, creatures communicate, hunt and hide using light. The eyes of the colossal squid are not there to admire the scenery. They are highly specialized amplifiers for the faintest traces of light. Scientists believe these gigantic eyes serve one very specific purpose, an early warning system against death. The only natural predator of a fully grown colossal squid is the sperm whale. When a sperm whale dives down to hunt, it moves through the water like a massive bus driving through a cloud of insects, except in this case, the insects are tiny bioluminescent plankton organisms. As the whale plows through the water, it disturbs these organisms, and they flash in alarm. The whale, without meaning to, leaves behind a glowing trail, a halo of sparkling light in its wake. A human eye, even at shallow depths, would never notice this, but the enormous eye of the colossal squid, with its massive pupil and extraordinarily sensitive retina, can detect this faint glow from hundreds of meters away. It does not see the whale itself. It sees the shadow the whale casts within the glittering plankton. This gives it the precious seconds it needs to flee, before the whale's sonar locks onto it. But light in the deep sea is a double-edged sword. Whoever sees light gains an advantage, but whoever is seen is often dead. This has led to a fascinating evolutionary arms race, one centered entirely on camouflage. This is where color comes into play. Have you ever wondered why so many deep-sea creatures, the colossal squid included, along with various shrimp, are a deep, vivid red? At the surface, a red animal would stand out like a fire truck, but water filters light. Red is the very first color in the spectrum to be absorbed. Within just a few meters of depth, red light disappears entirely. There is no red sunlight left to reflect down here. A red animal in the deep sea appears completely black. It is the perfect cloak of invisibility, but the colossal squid takes this one step further. Its reddish skin is not merely dark, it actively absorbs light. Many of its prey species use bioluminescence. If the squid's body reflected that light, it would give away its position instantly. Its red skin, however, swallows nearly all bioluminescent light that hits it. It remains a phantom. It is in a sense a stealth bomber, except instead of absorbing radar, it absorbs light itself. But not everything in the deep wants to hide. Some creatures use light as bait. The anglerfish is the classic example. It carries a long appendage tipped with a glowing lure filled with bioluminescent bacteria. In absolute darkness, this small point of light is irresistible. Curious fish or crustaceans approach, believing they have found food, and are instead swallowed whole. It is a trap as simple and as deadly as a gingerbread house in an old fairy tale. But there is one hunter that has taken this game of light to a level that feels almost unfair: the dragonfish. Most bioluminescent creatures in the deep sea produce blue or green light, because blue light travels the farthest through water. As a result, nearly all deep-sea animals have eyes finely tuned to detect blue and green, but completely blind to red. The dragonfish, however, has developed a remarkable superpower. It possesses a light organ that emits red light. This is extraordinarily difficult, physiologically speaking, but tactically brilliant. It swims through the darkness, essentially shining a red flashlight ahead of itself. Because its prey, small shrimp and fish, cannot perceive red light at all, their eyes are simply not built for that wavelength. They have no idea they are being illuminated. The dragonfish sees them lit up clearly, while they believe they remain hidden in total darkness. It is a sniper using night vision in a room full of people who cannot see infrared at all. It has created its own private channel, a secret frequency on which only it can transmit and receive. These examples show us that the darkness of the deep sea is anything but empty. It is a battlefield of information. Every flicker, every glow, could mean the difference between a meal and death. In the deep sea, every point of light reveals a position. To glow is to risk everything. This is why so many creatures have developed complex ways of controlling their own light. Some jellyfish, like the deep-sea jellyfish Atolla, use light as an alarm system. When attacked, they begin flashing wildly and brightly, like a strobe light. The purpose is not to blind the attacker, it is to summon something even bigger. The light is meant to attract a larger predator, one that might then attack the original attacker instead. The enemy of my enemy becomes my salvation, or at least my escape. It is a desperate gamble, screaming as loudly as possible with light, in the hope that something larger arrives to eat your attacker before it eats you. The vampire squid also uses light for defense. Instead of releasing ink, which would be pointless in total darkness, it releases a cloud of glowing mucus. This luminous cloud confuses the attacker, potentially blinding it briefly, while the vampire squid slips away into the dark water. It is a flash grenade made of pure light, so we see that the eyes of these giants and the lights of the deep are inseparably linked. The enormous eyes of the colossal squid are a direct evolutionary response to the faint glow of its enemies. If bioluminescence did not exist, these eyes would likely have withered away entirely, the way eyes have atrophied in cave-dwelling animals that live in permanent darkness. But evolution did not choose blindness here. It chose extraordinary vision instead, but sight is only one sense, and light is only one tool. In a world as extreme as the Mariana Trench or the Southern Ocean, having good eyes is not enough. You need strategies that govern your entire body and your entire life cycle. We have seen how these animals eat, but how they breathe and how they see. But how do they behave? What does the daily life of an animal that lives for 400 years and barely moves actually look like? Is doing nothing here a failure, or is it the highest virtue of all? To understand the most extreme survival strategies of all, we need to explore what it truly means to live a life built almost entirely around waiting, and why doing nothing can be the hardest job in the world. Many of us grow up believing that idleness is a kind of moral failing, that someone who sits still and does nothing is unproductive, a burden. We admire busyness, constant motion, the bustle of a city at rush hour. Stillness feels like stagnation, like falling behind. But if we took that human work ethic and packed it into a submersible and sent it 4,000 meters down, we would need to rewrite our entire philosophy. Down there, our restless drive for activity would be a death sentence. In the deep sea, the golden rule is this: doing nothing is the only way to avoid dying. When we marvel at the biological machinery of these giants, their enormous bodies, their huge eyes, their specialized enzymes, we need to understand that the machine itself is useless without the right programming. And the operating system of deep-sea creatures is set to a function that is difficult for us to truly grasp: aggressive patience. To understand just how extreme this strategy is, let us consider the daily life of a typical deep-sea inhabitant. Take the colossal squid, or a large deep-sea anglerfish. Their lives consist of roughly 99% doing absolutely nothing. A hunter sitting motionless for hours on end, waiting for a single opportunity, would, by comparison to these animals, look like a bundle of frantic energy. A colossal squid does not actively swim around looking for prey. It drifts, it uses its neutral buoyancy to hang in the water like an enormous balloon. Every movement of its tentacles, every beat of its fins, costs energy, and energy, as we know, is the hardest currency in the ocean. These animals are not pursuit predators like a cheetah or a tuna. They are ambush hunters in the most extreme sense. They play a game of nerves. Whoever moves first loses energy. Whoever waits might win a meal. This ambush strategy is the key to gigantism itself. Only because you do not move can you afford to grow this large. A body that runs constantly, like a sports car at full throttle, needs a constant supply of fuel. A body that functions like a parked warehouse needs almost nothing at all. But when the moment of truth arrives, when an unsuspecting fish drifts within reach of those tentacles or that enormous mouth, everything changes in an instant. In milliseconds, the system shifts from total stillness to explosive action. The colossal squid fires its hooked tentacles forward. The anglerfish snaps open its enormous jaws and creates a sudden vacuum, sucking its prey straight in. It is a life of extremes, months of absolute stillness, broken by seconds of brutal violence. This extreme patience also requires a very particular relationship with food. We humans eat several times a day, and if we miss even a single meal, we start to feel irritable. A deep-sea giant like the giant isopod has to live with a completely different reality, the reality of true famine. Food down here does not arrive on a schedule, it arrives in unpredictable waves. A whale fall today might mean nothing for the next 5 years. To survive this, these animals have perfected the art of gluttony. When food does arrive, they do not stop when they feel full. They eat until they are physically near bursting. We know the feeling of being almost too full to move after an enormous holiday meal. For the giant isopod, that feeling is not an unfortunate side effect. It is the entire goal. They eat until their legs can barely touch the ground, until their mobility is severely compromised. They trade movement for storage. They become living pantries. This strategy allows them to bridge stretches of scarcity that would kill almost any other animal. They do not go hungry, they live off their reserves. But surviving is not the only requirement. Reproduction matters too, and here we find another fascinating pattern, quality over quantity. In biology, there are broadly 2 paths: mass production or careful craftsmanship. Many surface-dwelling fish go with mass, producing millions of tiny eggs and hoping a handful survive by sheer luck. It is cheap, high-volume reproduction. The giants of the deep sea, like the giant grenadier or certain deep-sea octopuses, behave more like a small, traditional workshop. They produce very few offspring, but each one is of the highest possible quality and built to last. They lay few eggs, but those eggs are large and rich in nutrients, and the young that hatch from them are already well developed, larger, stronger, and far more likely to survive than the tiny drifting larvae of surface fish. This strategy only makes sense in a stable, if resource-poor, environment. When food is scarce, a tiny larva has almost no chance of finding enough energy to grow. A large, well-provisioned juvenile starts with a real advantage. It is an investment in the future, but it is also a risk. When you have only a handful of offspring, every single loss is a catastrophe for the population. This makes these species extremely vulnerable to outside disturbance. Another aspect of their survival strategy is simply being too big to eat. We talked earlier, with the Japanese spider crab, about release from predation pressure, which is really just a fancy scientific way of saying, I am too big to be eaten. In shallow water, the ocean is full of predators. Danger lurks everywhere. Being small and able to hide is a great strategy there. In the deep sea, there are fewer predators overall. The large sharks that dominate shallower waters rarely venture this deep. The predators that do live down here are often themselves energy conservers with limited size. Once a giant isopod reaches the size of a football and develops a hard shell, there is simply almost nothing left that can break through it. It has outgrown the category of prey entirely. It has reached a critical mass that grants it a kind of immunity. It does not need to flee. It does not need to hide. It can simply stroll across the seafloor, calmly aware that, for almost everything else down here, it is simply too big a target. Life in the deep sea, then, is life lived in slow motion. It is built on stability, patience, and efficiency. It is not the constant hunting and being hunted of the open plains. It is more like an extraordinarily slow game of chess, where every move must be carefully considered, because you might only get to make one every few months. But these strategies, the waiting, the storing, the slow growth, all rest on one critical assumption, that the rules of the game will not change. An animal that takes 50 years to reach maturity cannot adapt if we strip away its food source within 20 years. An animal built to idle along at 2 degrees cannot simply rev its engine up to 4 degrees without burning out. Specialization in the extreme makes these creatures the unchallenged rulers of their domain, but it also makes them prisoners of that domain. We have now seen why these animals grow so large, to use oxygen more efficiently. We have seen what they eat, from the finest marine snow to the carcasses of whales. We have learned how they use bioluminescence and how they survive crushing pressure, and we have come to understand that what looks like laziness is in fact their greatest strength. But what does any of this mean for us? Why should anyone care about the fate of a giant isopod, or a blind, ancient shark drifting through the dark? Are they nothing more than curiosities in some great cabinet of natural wonders? Or are they something more? Before we surface, there is one final, crucial question to consider. We now know almost everything about their past and their present, but do these giants have a future? And what does their fate tell us about the state of our own planet? We have come a long way on this journey. We descended from the sunlit surface into the twilight zone, crossed through the eternal night of the bathypelagic, and finally touched the floor of the Mariana Trench itself. We met creatures that exceed our wildest nightmares and our boldest dreams in equal measure. We learned that isopods can grow to the size of footballs, that squid fight off whales using rotating hooks, and that sharks were already swimming through the oceans centuries before much of human history as we know it had even begun. Now, at the end of this expedition, it is time to rise back toward the surface, to equalize the pressure and return to our world of light, noise, and constant motion. But before we open the hatch of our imaginary submersible and breathe in the fresh air above, we need to confront an uncomfortable truth, a truth that weighs heavier than the 1100 atmospheres of pressure down below. The truth is, we know almost nothing. It is a frequently repeated statistic, but it loses none of its weight for that. We have explored less than 5% of our oceans. We have more detailed maps of the surface of Mars than we do of the floor of our own seas. When we talk about the giants of the deep, the colossal squid, the giant isopod, we are talking about the handful of puzzle pieces we happen to stumble upon. Every dive made by a modern research submersible, whether from international teams or independent research institutes, brings new species to light. Every time a camera is lowered into a new crevice, we see something no human eye has ever witnessed before. This leaves us with a fascinating and slightly unsettling question. What else is down there? If we have already found squid as long as buses and jellyfish longer than blue whales, is it really so far-fetched to imagine that something even larger exists? We do not know whether there is an upper limit to size at all. In a world this stable, this vast, and this unexplored, the deep abyssal plains could be hiding entirely different kinds of titans. Perhaps not sea monsters that swallow ships, as the old legends of the Kraken describe, but biological wonders that would completely overturn our understanding of what life can be. We humans are obsessed with searching for life on other planets. We point enormous telescopes into the sky. We send probes to Jupiter's moon Europa, hoping to find life in the ocean hidden beneath its ice. And in doing so, we often forget that the truly alien is already here, living right beneath us, or rather, beneath many kilometers of water. These creatures feel like visitors from another world. The Greenland shark, blind and ancient, drifting through the icy dark. The spider crab, moving like some forgotten machine. They show us that life does not follow a single rulebook. What works on land is meaningless down here. Life finds a way, even in places we once thought were utterly impossible. But this alien world is not as isolated as we once believed, and this is the point where our wonder must turn into responsibility. We tend to think of the deep sea as something distant, out of sight and out of mind. But the oceans are a connected system. What we do up here trickles down. We have already discussed how climate change warms the water and strips it of oxygen. But there are more direct threats too. Plastic waste has already been found in the Mariana Trench 11,000 meters down. The same giants that feed on marine snow are now also consuming our microplastics. A giant isopod cannot tell the difference between a natural particle and a fragment of a discarded plastic bag. And there is an even larger threat looming, one tied, ironically, to our pursuit of green technology, deep-sea mining. Scattered across the vast plains of the ocean floor are what are known as polymetallic nodules, potato-sized lumps rich in rare metals, the very metals used in batteries for electric vehicles, in smartphones, and in wind turbines. Industries around the world are hungry for these resources, but these nodules are not simply rocks. They are habitats for countless specialized organisms. They form layer by layer over millions of years, just as the animals living on and around them do. If we begin tearing up the seafloor with massive machinery, essentially open pit mining, but underwater, we would destroy in a matter of hours what took millions of years to form. We would wipe out entire ecosystems before we even fully understood them. The great slow giants would have no chance. They cannot flee. They cannot regenerate quickly. A giant squid or a Greenland shark cannot adapt to industrial mining. The very strategy of slowness that made them rulers across the eons would become their immediate death sentence. Why should any of this matter to someone living their everyday life, far from the ocean? Why should it matter whether a giant isopod survives in the Pacific? First, because we are biologically dependent on these systems. The oceans are the lungs of our planet and our largest carbon reservoir. The animals of the deep sea, which capture carbon from the surface and bury it in the sediment below, play a role in the global climate system that we are only just beginning to understand. If we disrupt this mechanism, the consequences for our climate could be far-reaching in ways we cannot yet predict. Second, and perhaps more importantly, though it is a more philosophical point, there is the matter of wonder itself. Who would want to live in a world stripped of its mysteries? Who would want to live in a world with no more monsters, only resources to be extracted? The giants of the deep sea are the last great mystery of our planet. They remind us that we do not control everything, that we do not know everything, and that we do not own everything. They are a mirror when we look at the Greenland shark, drifting alone through the darkness for 400 years, carrying parasites on its eyes but moving with absolute calm. We see a kind of counterpoint to our own lives. We humans live in a constant rush. We drown ourselves in bad news. We rely on caffeine to push through exhaustion. We get worked up over arguments online. We fear missing out on something, anything. The shark has no fear of missing out. It has no urgency at all. It simply exists. Perhaps in its slow, blind existence, it is happier than we are, or at least more at peace than we tend to be in our optimized, scheduled lives. Perhaps secretly we envy these animals their detachment from time itself. The deep sea teaches us humility. It shows us that greatness does not require noise. The true giants are quiet. They do not roar. They wait. And they were here long before we ever existed. It is now up to us. We are the first species in the history of this planet with the power either to destroy the deep sea or to protect it. We can choose whether to treat this alien world as a quarry to be stripped for resources or as a sacred reserve of biodiversity to be preserved. The monsters of legend were always the creatures, the kraken crushing ships, the sea serpent devouring sailors. But when we look in the mirror today, we might have to ask ourselves a difficult question. Are we the real monsters now? Are we the force of nature that the colossal squid should fear? If it only knew that we existed, the deep sea has proven remarkably resilient against the passage of time, but it is fragile against us. The balance down there is delicate, cold, pressure, oxygen and time, all finely tuned together. Remove just one piece and the whole system can fall apart. We hope this journey into the abyss has changed the way you see our blue planet, even just a little. Perhaps the next time you stand at the edge of the sea and look out across the water, you will think not only of the waves, but of what lies kilometers beneath them. That somewhere down there, in the darkness, a heartbeat continues, far slower than our own, but just as precious. Welcome back to the surface. The air up here is thin, the light is bright, but we are home. Rest well, and stay curious about the wonders that remain hidden in the dark.